This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. It's nice to see you. Or, I hope it's nice for you to hear me. This week, I interviewed Dr. Cara Ocobock, and she was incredible, smart, funny. Kind of want to be here when I grow up one day. I love talking to her because I got to learn about human energetics, and you will too. And I also got to talk about science communication with her, more specifically strategies for talking to people who don't know a lot about science, which is hyper relevant in the world today. In the interest of spreading science around, if you know someone who might like this show, go ahead and, send them your favorite episode. Maybe we'll get a few more people who like science from it. One thing to note before we dive in, there is some explicit language on the show this week. So if you care about that, or you're listening with someone who might care about that, maybe this could be a good one to skip. If you really want a bleeped out version, email me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com and I will shoot you a version. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, especially Dr. Cara Ocobock. You're the best. All right, enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me on Zoom, where all of my interviews are now, I have Dr. Cara Ocobock of Notre Dame University. She is a professor of anthropology there, and she is the director of the Human Energetic Lab. She's also the host of the Sausage of Science podcast, co-host. I will be interviewing Dr. Christopher Lynn eventually as well. and as if that weren't enough, she's also an accomplished powerlifter. Hello.
Hello. I don't know about accomplished, but also we're recording, right?
Yes, we are recording.
Oh, okay. I didn't get a notice. And so I had no idea. Sorry. I'm so used to the notices of like the computer yelling at me like this meeting is being recorded.
Oh no. So because I've got my own little Zoom thing over here. And what happens is that the guy who taught me how to podcast told me a story about when he was working for NPR and he interviewed this head of state and he forgot to hit the record button, and there's 40 minutes of interview just gone forever, and he couldn't ask the guy to do it again. And so I hit the record button as soon as we start talking. Listeners, I delete so much stuff.
So much. I mean, as someone who co-hosts a podcast, I know how much BSing we do and how much needs to get cut for it to be a coherent episode. But anyway, Gabby, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really, really delighted to be talking with you today. And I think you got it all right. Professor at the University of Notre Dame. I was a power lifter before the pandemic hit, and I am now a depressed former power lifter until I can safely get back in the gym again. So, yeah.
I think that is super duper impressive. My talents have always run more towards like cardio. I really enjoy a good long run. But I do, you know what I do really sympathize with the powerlifters is I love individual sports. Mm-hmm. And also having other people around who are like doing the same thing as you, but like you're working on your own thing, like you're competing against yourself. That's the best.
That's the thing. And so a colleague and I, Dr. Katie Hedgemanick, who's at Brooklyn College, part of the CUNY system. She's a cultural anthropologist and she's an Olympic weightlifter. And we did this survey-based study looking at how COVID-19 stay-at-home orders impacted exercise routines and then how that affected perceived physical and mental health. And it's the gym lifters who have suffered the most in this. And part of it's, lack of access to equipment because that equipment is expensive and takes up a lot of space and is heavy and all that. But a lot of it's the community. They miss that exact thing that you just talked about of that informal gym community of people you lift with, even though it's a very individual sport, it becomes a big part of social life. And yeah, us lifters are hurting hard right now.
Yeah, I totally believe it. Back before I lived in one of the most expensive cities on earth, thanks San Francisco, I used to be a really big horseback rider, and it's kind of the same thing. Like I would go to the barn and I would be at the barn for like 6 or 8 hours just chatting. Like I'm not going to ride for 6 hours. I'm going to ride for like an hour and then I'm going to like just find a million little other things to do. And it's like a huge social outlet. I will admit that I took up running in college when I was living in a room designed for 3 people and I had 4 people in it and I was sharing a bathroom with another 4 people. So I started running to get away from people.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
So the reason I brought you on the show for like kind of multiple reasons. One, because you are doing a lot of really interesting research in two separate yet very connected fields. One is energetics. You are studying people who live in very cold places, reindeer herders. Reindeer still don't seem like they ought to be real to me. That's neither here nor there. And you study kind of metabolism and adaptations to cold weather. We actually had Dr. Stephanie Levy on a long time ago, and we had an incredible show about cold adaptation. But one of the things I really like about your work is you take this kind of holistic approach to everything, and I can kind of see how you're interweaving a lot of different things, both in your personal life, like with the powerlifting and exercise, into like what you're doing hard academic science in. And then the second half of what is going to be on the show is your science communication and how you like actually communicate your results to the public in a way that's understandable, / how do you even reach the public? Because I am fully aware of the fact that the vast majority of the people who listen to this show are probably people who are already interested in anthropology or science.
It's already the insiders.
Yeah. I would say that my mom and my uncle are probably the only people who listen to this show who don't already care about science. My uncle is the best. He immigrated here from Venezuela, and he is like got this like crazy side hustle delivering cheese. And he will call me and tell me like when he thinks a show is bad. He's like, hey, that one was really boring, just so you know.
That's the toughest critic is your uncle. That's amazing. Usually family is like the nicest about it. Like, oh honey, it's so good. No. You get told.
No, my uncle will let me know.
That's fantastic.
Hola tía Ricky, ¿cómo estás? Anyway, so let's get started. Tell me about reindeer herders and why are we studying reindeer herders? Why should we even care about them?
That's always the question, right? Like that's the big grant question. Who cares? And why should you give me money to do this? I'll take a slight step back and say, of course, this all kind of came out of my dissertation work what feels like eons ago, but yesterday feels like eons ago at this point, in which I looked at how people differentially expend energy in different climates. So in the Rocky Mountains, and we covered different seasons to compare how like spring, summer, fall, and winter, how metabolically demanding each of those seasons were with people doing really extreme physical activity. And from that, this is my own personal bias coming in. I like the cold a whole lot more. And so it became, right, I would rather work in a cold setting than a hot setting because physically I handle that a whole lot better. And also, honestly, cold climate populations are largely understudied in the modern day. You have some really old and very much outdated work on indigenous cold climate populations in Canada and Greenland, but like it's old 1930s, 1950s, things like that. And then you have a bit of a bump up when you have, say, Bill Leonard and Steph Levy and Josh Snodgrass, all of these people coming in and studying groups in Russia. And that's just one. And so you have all of these equatorial populations really well represented when it comes to energetics, or Western populations when it comes to energetics, but the cold climates have been largely ignored. And so it became, my first pun of all of this was sending cold emails to researchers in Norway, Sweden, and Finland to see like, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to look at metabolism and cold climate adaptations in these areas. Is this something you might be interested in collaborating with me on? And Sweden shut the door like instantly, said everything I was doing was unethical, which kind of blew my mind because we have to go through a rigorous ethical approval process to even do this kind of work. But they have their reasons. Norway was kind of interested, but like slow in getting back and forth. And then folks in Finland were like down for it. And it was super exciting. And it took something like 3 years of going back and forth before the first data point was ever collected of just building that relationship and getting to know folks and seeing how feasible all of this was. And honestly, it felt like it was going to fall apart every moment until it didn't. And I mean, there would be days, if not weeks, where I would be in this deep depression of like, this is lost. It's never going to happen. And, really melodramatic. But then, finally got to the point of getting to data collection and it went really, really well. And are submitting grants now basically to keep on expanding this work and do something more and tie it in more specifically to climate change in particular.
Yes, yes. That is, I think, one of the most interesting aspects of studying any kind of climate adaptation. What are some of kind of the major insights that you found so far?
Mm-hmm. So the coolest one, and this was a paper that came out this past summer, summer 2020, looking at the resting metabolic rate among the reindeer herders. And so for listeners, resting metabolic rate is the bare minimum amount of energy you need to expend to literally do nothing all day. And that even includes eating. Like eating is not part of your resting metabolic rate. So if you were to lay on the floor and do nothing, your resting metabolism would probably range, I don't know, between 1,200 and 1,800 to 2,000 calories per day, depending on your size. And what we know of cold climate populations is that we often see an increase in resting metabolic rate. So there's greater heat production in order to stay warm in the cold climate and maintain your body temperature. But there's also a high degree of individual and interpopulational variation in this. And like I said 5 minutes ago, we don't have a lot of good modern data, and we need a lot more modern data to really pin this down. And so I looked at the reindeer herders and I was expecting, kind of across the board higher resting metabolic rate as we see in the Yakutia and others, especially with a study done in Russia. Yakutia are also in Russia. And I didn't see that, at least not fully. Male reindeer herders, the resting metabolic rates were all over the place when you're comparing to a predictive equation. You had some that were higher than expected, some that were lower than expected, and some that were like right along, like with temperate folks. But women were all consistently high. And even more insane is their resting metabolic rates were higher than the men's resting metabolic rates, which is like never really been seen because resting metabolic rates scale so much to body size. Men are generally bigger, and the men were bigger in this population than the women, but the women had higher resting metabolic rates. They kind of tracked with what you expected with a cold climate population, whereas the men didn't. They were just all over. And so that was the really cool finding coming out of it. And, sadly, it's still a really low sample size and want to go back and get more. And also want to get thyroid hormone measurements because thyroid hormone seems to control that resting metabolic rate thermostat, setting it at, whatever level you're burning. But thyroid hormone is also super important for maintaining a pregnancy. And so perhaps women might be more constrained in their thyroid hormone variation than men. And that cold climate populations, women in particular, might have a higher set point for that thyroid hormone in order to maintain not only resting metabolic rate, but pregnancies as well. And so that is a hypothesis that needs testing, hopefully in the near future.
So there's one thread that I want to pull out for listeners, which is that when you study energy expenditure, I think a lot of people do think, oh, like metabolism and resting metabolic rate. If you're a scientist, maybe you think about resting metabolic rate, that is, or like total energy expenditure. But kind of like the broader so what of energetics is looking at we only have like a limited amount of energy that we can use, right? And in Western cultures in America, we tend to have more access to more energy, but ultimately we still have to allocate those energetic resources to certain tasks, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're in a energy constrained environment, so basically if you're not getting as much food as other people, your body has to make hard decisions about where they're going to put that energy. So that's kind of why that's potentially, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, why reproduction is potentially a factor in why these women have those higher resting metabolic rates.
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting because this is relating to an interview that Chris and I conducted yesterday with Dr. Herman Poncer, who is my advisor, who has a book coming out. And he is the originator of this constrained theory for total energy expenditure, which is kind of what you're referencing, whether you know that or not. That's what you are referencing.
I do. I'm actually going to have him on the show in a couple months.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, so it's this idea that we all kind of operate on a regular day-to-day basis within this narrow range of total energy expenditure. So like this pie. And if all of a sudden, your environment has less energy available, you're going to shrink that overall pie. But how you shrink it is going to depend on what's going on. One of the studies that we talked about was one done among Biggest Loser contestants. So this is the show where you have people who are trying to rapidly lose weight. And the Kevin Hall group decided to actually measure their metabolic rates. And they found that these folks were put in this situation where they were consuming really, really small number of calories, like 600 to 900 calories a day.
Wow.
And then exercising like hours and hours a day. So energy expenditure was through the roof, but energy intake basically tanked. And what we see is that the body will adapt to that. There's going to be a metabolic adaptation, and your body's like, oh shit, like we are starving and we need to deal with this. And because they're being forced to partake in, extreme levels of physical activity, their body can't really take that cost away because they're being pushed to do it. So what you saw is that the resting metabolic rates got really low, much lower than expected for their body size. And this is the body's way of conserving energy in a negative energy balance in which they are expending more than they are taking in. And yeah, that's great. And, it makes sense because they want to be in a negative energy balance, but this was a pretty extreme situation. And even worse is that once they stopped this diet and went to kind of more of a normal lifestyle, the resting metabolic rate didn't really rebound back to where it should have for their weight. And so people very quickly gained the weight back because they had this depressed metabolic rate without realizing they had a depressed metabolic rate.
Yeah. And I think one thing to point out too is that I think a lot of people, when they think about losing weight, a lot of them are like, yeah, I'm just going to exercise more, and like, yeah, I'll change my diet a little bit and everything. But the thing is, like, realistically, there's only so many calories that a regular person is going to burn doing exercise in a given day. And your rest, like most of the calories that you burn at any given day are from your resting metabolic rate, unless you're doing like insane amounts of physical activity, which during the pandemic, as an American office worker, I am not.
And that's the thing that really, again, with going back to that COVID study, folks who like their cardio, like they were exercising way more because a lot of them found they had more time to do it.
You know what else it is? It's in San Francisco, people aren't driving as much. And so I'm less worried about getting hit by a car. I can go on these super long runs without stopping. And I'm like, no one's going to hit me. It's good.
That's an exciting thing. But yeah, anyway, so like to get back to what you were saying and like the why should we care about reindeer herder metabolism or metabolism at all? And the quick and easy answer is understanding obesity and the obesity epidemic. And how do we start to untangle this multifactorial problem? Because obesity really isn't, you can say it's essentially calories in and calories out, but what's actually affecting the number of calories that go in and what's actually affecting the number of calories go out is a lot of different stuff. And you can't just pin it down to like self-control and things like that. And so understanding the different variables that go into establishing our metabolism kind of set point and changing that set point during different circumstances, that's part of it. The second one is, again, trying to get a better understanding of the human variation in metabolism. Like I said, when it comes to these measurements, we have equatorial populations pretty well represented, temperate climate populations pretty well represented, but cold climate not. And it's time we get a better look at that because no one population is a monolith for the human species. We need to have a broader view of what's going on. It's too bad you had Steph Levy on like way early. Getting her on now along with Teresa Gildner would be great. They had a theory paper come out just recently kind of connecting obesity with climate change and how climate change could be fueling obesogenic environments. And part of that is looking at cold climates, especially, the Arctic Circle and above. They have been hit hardest and fastest by climate change. They are seeing rapid increases in temperature, and on top of having more efficient warming technologies, all of these things, people aren't as cold exposed as they used to be, both between the climate and technology. And so they might be seeing decreases in their metabolic rate that they are unaware of, much like the Biggest Loser folks were unaware of. Granted, it's not as extreme as the Biggest Loser folks, but without that pressure to maintain resting metabolic rates, their metabolic rate goes down, but perhaps their eating doesn't change. And so you might see this gradual increase in tendency towards obesity with cold climate populations. Again, it is a multifactorial thing. Market integration, particularly in lesser accessible populations in the Arctic, that doesn't necessarily apply to the reindeer herders I'm working with, but in parts of Canada and the northern US as well, lots of different market foods coming in. They have big issues and big implications for health. But a part of this could be climate change. And I think it's really important for us to really get a handle on the physiological effects climate change could be having on our bodies.
Yeah, no, this is really, really exciting work. And it's also really, really complicated, which is part of what makes it exciting, but also part of what makes it super difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
Especially because I think that a lot of people want very simple packaged, like, okay, here it is. We've decided that this is the truth. It's never going to change. I feel like that's like the number one thing that I get from my relatives whenever they ask me about weight loss or like science or whatever. They're like, but wasn't it a few years ago that eggs were really bad for us? Like, why are scientists saying eggs are okay now? You know, and that there's just like there's a lot that goes into that, right? So I think that there's like a lot of different things to talk about when it comes to science communication. Mm-hmm. For you, running a whole podcast and also having done some really interesting like thought work around and experiments on science communication, you're just like much like the obesity epidemic, you're very multifaceted.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take that as a compliment for the best way to be compared to the obesity epidemic.
Oh my God. Anyway, but like you are super multifaceted, and you're kind of like tackling this idea of like talking to people about science in a lot of different ways. I wanted to bring up a paper that you wrote fairly recently, definitely recently, because it's about COVID and about why science communication is so important in light of COVID, right? Because I think that we're seeing the natural effects of not being able to communicate science to people who are not interested in science normally right now during COVID. Thoughts, feelings?
I have so many thoughts and perhaps even more feelings at this point. Because I would say this past year, more than anything, has actually made me really question the efficacy of our science communication efforts. Are we actually reaching the people that we want to be reaching, or are we preaching to the choir, which I largely think that we are when it comes to like the mass science communication efforts through, you know, whether it's popular articles, podcasts, things like that. It's the people who want to read and listen to those things who are going to read and listen to those things, not the people who necessarily need to read and listen to those things, or at least we think they need to. And I think the pandemic really highlighted more than anything, it's not just a lack of science communication, but a lack of understanding of how science works and how the process of science works. And you hit the nail on the head with your example about eggs and your family asking you, like, 10 years ago, eggs were the devil and no one should consume them because they'll instantly have a heart attack. And now eggs are kind of touted as like this perfect little package of food that's like energy dense and good for you. And that's because science is self-correcting. Yes. We are never going to get it right all the time, much less the first time. The first time is often the worst time, but we learn from those experiments the first time and we improve. And we saw that playing out in real time with the COVID pandemic. When you think about just, guidelines about mask wearing, of don't wear a mask, like, oh shit, wear a mask. And now like, wear 2 masks. And people view that level of uncertainty as they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But what it is us learning. We thought we knew what was going on. We tested it. We realized we were wrong. And then we improved upon our previous theory. And that's how science works. And that's how science moves forward. And there is an absolute misunderstanding of that very basic process, that you want that. You want us to correct. You don't want us to stick to our guns of no mask because that's what we said first, and therefore we should never go back on our word. Science is not a promise. Science is a process. And I think that is something that is so critical for people to understand, and they don't. And I mean, for me, I feel like that needs to happen very early on in the educational system, because it's so hard to do once people are older and very much set in their thoughts and ways about science and the findings they read about in whatever popular media article. I think that is a critical point. As for like, what do we do now? If we are not the people who can really implement changes in early education, because I mean, we both know with a lot of the early education requirements, science gets a short shrift. It's, the English and it's the math, but science requires English and math. You can teach both of those topics by teaching science.
Yes. I think for anyone who's listening to this podcast right now and they're like, what can I personally do? I would suggest, if you know people, which I'm assuming you do because most people know people, think about who you know, think about who might not be able to understand the science or who might not have the resources already. You have those resources. Go ahead and start a friendly conversation with them, because one of the things that science lacks right now, science communication lacks, is like we aren't very good at penetrating spaces where there aren't already people who are interested in science. But the truth is, a lot of us live in those spaces and we can reach those people. So this is my plea to you.
That was exactly where I was going to go with this, because I have become very disheartened with, typical science communication approaches that just assume people are going to read my infographic or, the media brief of whatever paper I put out. People care about science for a few different reasons. And one is it answers the big questions, why are we here? Things like that. One, there's real life implications, and that's always going to be a big hook. Like if you can relate your science to something that affects somebody on a day-to-day basis, they are going to be interested. But a big one that I think people forget about, and it gets to exactly what you were saying, is they're going to care about your science if they care about you as a person.
Yes.
And they're never going to learn or care about you as a person unless you start those conversations. And the problem is that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And I would love for there to be some nationwide program that like pairs up a non-scientist with a scientist to have like a once a week conversation, because that's honestly how it's going to have to go to start changing those minds, or at least opening them up to the possibility that there's a different way of thinking.
Yeah. I think that this actually relates back to an essay that you published on powerlifting.
Oh, the Sapiens piece.
Yes, the Sapiens piece on powerlifting. And in it, you talk about how when you first showed up at a powerlifting gym, you were pretty much the only woman. It was a super kind of unpleasant experience, and it took a really long time to get acceptance in the community there. And even after having done all that, you received acceptance, you realized that it was acceptance just for you, which is super, super disheartening.
Oh my God. It's crushing when you realize
This essay is super, super good, and it's definitely publicly available. I'll post it on my website so y'all can find it. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about science communication in general. And I was like, I wonder if even if we manage to infiltrate every corner of the United States with scientists, then people see that scientists are normal people too. Normal-ish people too. No one's really normal, but regular folk. I like, part of me wonders, like, is it going to be like, oh, it's different because I know Cara, or like I know Gabby, who's actually a content strategist and not a science, but that's neither here nor there. Like I wonder if that's going to happen too. But I think overall it'll balance out on the side of more people knowing about science, I hope.
I mean, that is my hope too. And I think part of having those discussions with family members who are, whatever anti-science agenda you can think of, or friends who are whatever anti-science agenda you can think of, if nothing else, it gets them to respect you. I highly recommend for those who attempt to have these conversations that you should honestly shut up and listen. Mm-hmm. Listen to where they're coming from, listen to why they think what it is that they think. Use the yes and approach, which is an improv comedy approach of, yes, you have to accept what they're saying, not necessarily as true, but you have to accept it as true for them. And then you build on that, and you ask questions, and you dig a little bit deeper and expose them to newer things. And it might not change their mind on that particular thing, but you would become a trusted resource for them to turn to when maybe something new comes up of like, hey, Cara, or hey, Gabby, what do you think about this new drug? Or, whatever the CDC said about COVID-19 coming out right now. Like, is this valid? Is this real? So being that resource, once that trust is gained, is, I think, a big way to lead folks to a little bit more science trusting mentality.
Yes. And I also don't want to pretend that this isn't exhausting. Like, everything that we're describing can be exhausting to do.
So exhausting. I mean, like, even doing the regular science communication that isn't personal one-on-one communication, that is exhausting. It is a second and third job in and of itself that, higher ed does not appreciate and recognize nearly enough.
No, and they don't actually teach anyone how to do it. It's kind of like, it's also like professors. They don't teach professors how to teach. They're just like, oh, you're really smart and you're good at research. Here are some 18-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I run science communication workshops for grad students. And I have for a few years now, because grad school especially, this is going to sound terrible, but the human side is kind of trained out of you, and you are trained to speak in jargon that only your colleagues will understand and respect. And you lose that ability to talk to the general public, and that is bad. And so, hitting it at that point, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the things that I liked the most that I did when I was in grad school, University of Nebraska, I taught a lab course for Intro to Biological Anthropology. But the way that I had my class structured, I would always have one class every semester where it was kind of a leftover class. I think it was supposed to be to review before the exams, but what I told students was that they could come and they could ask me whatever they wanted. It could be about class material, didn't have to be about class material. Definitely had some students try and embarrass me by being like, I don't know, like, what do you think of sex? And I was like, it's great. I don't know. What do you want me to say? But what I realized is a lot of times people don't ask questions because they're scared of seeming dumb. And if you create an environment where it's like literally there's no question that you can ask me that I won't do my best to answer right now, and I'm not going to judge you for asking it. Like you get some questions that are heartbreaking, but like at least you're moving the conversation forward. Sorry, now I'm just thinking about some of the questions I got.
Yeah.
And
No. And it can be disheartening. And I think setting up the classroom atmosphere to be okay with questions is really important, especially when you get into controversial topics. I'm teaching anthropology of sports right now, and we're about to get into sexism in sports and then transgender athletes and their participation in sports, which is very controversial, and not everyone is going to agree. And so making sure that it is a space in which people feel comfortable voicing controversial and, possibly not so great views is important to get that out there and have those discussions.
Yeah, definitely. I will say that one of the things that I would do at the beginning of the semester that now I'm like questioning whether or not it was the right thing to do was it wasn't my class, right? Like I was just a lowly TA that was assigned this class, and I got tuition breaks. Thank you, UNL. But I did begin the class at the beginning of every semester, and I was like, listen, this is a class about evolution. And I know evolution is a controversial topic. And while I'm very, very happy to discuss your individual problems with evolution during office hours, like this class will not become a forum on whether or not evolution is real and whether or not there is a creator. Like I'm absolutely not going to accept that. And if you are taking this class with the hopes of having those discussions in a public forum, like this is not the class for you. I will fail you if you do not give the correct answers as science says on the exams. And I would have students drop out at the beginning of the semester. And now I'm like, was that the right thing to do? I feel like I did prioritize the learning of the other students who were in the class. But at the same time, like those were on average, like 3 to 5 students I didn't reach every semester because of that.
Yeah, I feel like that sort of thing, and this can all get cut out, but I feel like that sort of thing immediately illegitimizes their beliefs in their mind. And so it may have been a missed opportunity for sure to at least expose them to it.
For sure. And I'm definitely not going to cut this out because I think that this is actually this is an exact example of what we're talking about. Like I have changed my mind about what I was doing in the past. Like I don't think I was necessarily right. I did what I thought was best at the time, but I'm also now 8 years older.
And wiser.
And so I have a different perspective, right? And I also, I just have a different perspective. And I think I probably would have approached that situation differently. So yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
We learn and grow even after we have whatever various letters after our name. Like we continually try to improve, much like the scientific process, on our own processes.
Yes.
Full circle, Gabby. Full circle.
Done. Do we even need to record anything else? Like, just get out of here. I'm not going to ask you any more questions. No, I am actually really enjoying this conversation, but I also want to be cognizant of you being a professional person with a lot of things in your life. I would like to ask you my final 3 questions, which are about books. And my first question is, if someone wanted to learn more about the kinds of things that you do, where is a good place for them to start? So total beginner, imagine like 18-year-old level of knowledge.
18-year-old, I mean, one, they can always go to my website and see lots of good stuff there. So please put my professional website up on the show notes because that will go. So there's actually some really good kind of more public facing books that have been coming out on these particular areas of research. So one I'm actually reviewing for the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. And I also interviewed this guy, Dan Lieberman's Exercised. I even got the dust jacket. Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. Dr. Herman Pontzer's book called Burn, coming out March 2nd. So next Tuesday. who knows? I'm not sure when this podcast is going up, but there's things like that. There's also a couple of really good books about humans at the extremes, taken from kind of the physiologist or medical doctor point of view. So like what happens to your body at high altitude versus in the cold versus in space, all of that cool shit. And so, yeah, there are some decent books out there. They will give you a particular point of view. And so I always say read broadly.
Yes.
But those are some good ones that have fairly recently come out.
Thank you. Yes, I have just finished Exercised, and Dr. Lieberman, I'm crossing my fingers, is going to come back on the show at the end of the semester because he was like, I'm very busy
Sweet.
right now.
We were lucky we got him in a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was like, it's okay. Like, I totally understand. Like,
he's also my academic grandfather, and so I had an in. He can't deny the grandchild.
I was gonna say, actually, I have had him on the show before, and I said something. I think the most embarrassing thing I've said on this podcast to date was to Dr. Lieberman, where I had him on, and one of the first things out of my mouth after hitting the record button was, I've always had the biggest academic crush on you. And there's just like silence on his end, and then he starts laughing, and I was like, thank you for laughing and not being like, wow, I'm hanging up.
And hang up. Yeah. Click and meeting.
But no, he's really, really great. I always, whenever I have a chance, also plug his Story of the Human Body book, which talks about kind of like mismatched diseases. But I think Exercised is like particularly relevant to what we were talking about. And then if you want to learn a little bit more about energetics and kind of a more practical application, a book that I've always really loved is Peter Ellison's On Fertile Ground, or On Fertile Ground, depending on who you ask. I really like that book. It does talk about endocrinology and energetics and reproduction.
Very life history focused.
Yes, exactly. And I think that it is such a great book. And I don't really hear people talking about it as much, probably because it's kind of older, but I love that book. It was one of the first things that got me into endocrinology in the first place. Oh, yes. Second question. What are you reading for work right now?
For work. Oh my goodness. So I have a couple of chapters left of the Exercise book, and I've been taking my time with it because I'm reviewing it for the journal. So it's taking a little bit of extra time for that. I'm also reading Woman the Gatherer, and I'm digging into some of the interesting kind of anthropology of sports literature, not books, but literature because of this COVID-19 and exercise study that we've been doing.
So cool. I'm really excited to see the stuff that you put out on that. And then last question, what are you consuming for fun right now?
Consuming for fun, because I pulled it up on Amazon, because, titles are always longer than you can actually remember. I am reading Dust Bowl Girls, the inspiring story of the team that barnstormed its way to basketball glory. And it's basically about, early women's basketball team during Depression America in Oklahoma. And when you read this, women's basketball rules back in the 1930s are just insane. Like,
what do you mean?
You have offense and defense, and they're separated, and like you stay on your half of the court and you don't cross. So there are 3 offensive players on one side and 3 defensive players on the other side, and then opposite for the opposite team. You're only allowed 1 dribble because dribbling more might damage your lady parts. And like it is insane when you read about it. And like all of these movements by like Herbert Hoover's wife, who was first lady at the time, to like restrict women's partaking in sport because of it's unladylike, and it'll strain you, and you won't be able to have good babies. It's fucking ridiculous.
It's
and
so crazy. There's listeners, there's like a whole history of people being like, oh, women better not do that or else their uterus will shrivel up and fall out. Like, have thoughts.
It's not even that old. Like the guy in charge of the Olympic or whatever federation for ski jumping in 2014 said that he thought ski jumping was a bad idea for women from a medical perspective, i.e. it'll hurt your baby making properties. And like, I'm reading it because, the anthropology of sports class. And so I go through, but it's fun and it's an enjoyable story. But my mind is forever blown by just the absurd shit people come up with thinking women are inferior.
Oh my gosh. It's so wise. I don't have anything to add to that. I'm just stewing over here.
Oh no, that's my life. Read something and get really pissed off about it.
And then, like, the worst part is that I like get like really, because I do the same thing, and I get like really angry, and I'm like slamming down my teacup, and like I'm like, "Mrr," and I can't do anything else. And my mom's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "This guy in 1930 said
the
something
patriarchy.
stupid."
It was the patriarchy, Mom.
The patriarchy.
The patriarchy.
Yep.
But yeah, and so I'm slowly working my way through like the original feminist anthropology literature, which is why, Woman the Gatherer and some Sarah Blaffer Hardy work and all of that stuff. But that's like a side project, and I sadly don't have anywhere near as much time for that as I want.
I totally understand. In the interest of time, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
This is so much fun. You are fantastic. You are as fantastic as your papers made you out to be. I was like reading them and I was like, she seems great.
Oh, thank you.
If you ever want to come back on, feel free to shoot me an email.
I will. Thank you so much, Gabby.
Of course. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show was produced and edited by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.